Well, it looks like it's time for our plants to go to bed. Now, but don't worry, it's time for another fantastic episode of Blooming in Brisbane. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 2 of Blooming in Brisbane. And on tonight's episode, we're joined by Claire Bickle, Jill Coombe and Noel Burdett.
We all know and love the traditional cottage garden, and of course many of the plants associated with that garden style are what you see in front of me: daisies, lavender, salvias and so on. But what about some of our native plant species? I'm sure there's plenty of room to really embrace some of these beautiful native plants that we have that we can use in this beautiful traditional cottage garden style. When it comes to cottage gardens, most of us do consider that soft traditional plants such as the lavender and the daisies are the way to go. But you know, we have such an amazing and bountiful amount of beautiful native plants that we can also use in that garden style. What you need to remember, of course, is that garden style is about softness and delicate plants, and also a little bit about textural change. That's a very important thing that we can do. Now, many of our native plants will also bring a huge selection of native birds and animals and insects into the garden, and that's one of the extra bounties that we'll get for our garden. So if you like a bit of cottage garden or like a bit of conifer look in your garden, then how about something like this? This is our native Daintree pine, and the Daintree pine comes from Queensland. It's a beautiful shaped member of the conifer family. In actual fact, it's more closely related to casuarinas. So this is a really nice way to sort of get a nice structural element in the garden. Now, we all know and love that Grevilleas will bring a wide assortment of birds to the garden, but not all Grevilleas have to be large or blousy. They can be soft and delicate, just like this beautiful old-fashioned one here called Orange Marmalade. I've always enjoyed this particular form because it creates a lovely big shrub in the garden which you can clip at any time of the year, and it'll provide for you these beautiful sort of burnt orange and dusky brown flowers. Now, this one here is called Apricot Glow, and Apricot Glow is one of the smaller growing Grevilleas that you can use in your garden. In actual fact, the plant doesn't even look like a Grevillea at all. It looks like another little shrub, but it gives the game away by these lovely delicate apricot flowers that are there. You can prune this plant into a nice soft shape. It'll flower all through the year for you and provide a lovely home for foraging birds and insects all the way through the year as well. Well, what about things such as trees and ground covers? All of these plants can play a role in a cottage garden. I suppose if you think the word informality, that's really the key. Try and stay away from straight lines, a little bit of softness and gentleness as well. And one of the loveliest ground covers that most people understand, of course, for our gardens, is this one here. This is a native violet, or Viola hederaceae. It is a delight to have in any garden. It'll grow in semi-shade or full sun sometimes, but just delight to have along steps, near driveways, pathways, those sorts of areas. It's a really abundant growing plant, and it is a native, and of course some of our butterflies really enjoy it. But you know, there are even smaller plants than those that we can use, especially along pathways and stepping stones. And this one here is called Pratia. Now, this little Pratia is a small mounding plant with tiny little white or sometimes blue flowers, and it's just a delight to see. It looks a little bit like a moss as it grows, and this is a plant that I think a lot of people have forgotten to plant in recent times, so look out for this one. Now, we all love hibiscus. I think a lot of us wouldn't actually have a garden without one because I just adore them. But we have a lot of lovely native hibiscus, the aleogynes, or aleogynes, how you'd like to pronounce them. This one here has bright purple flowers. I mean, really gobsmackingly beautiful flowers. And the foliage itself is really beautiful and textural. This is a plant that we can all use in our gardens, especially for a bit of softness, and it adds a gorgeous amount of tracery towards the back of a garden bed. I mean, soft and deep lavender flowers like this, of course, are really great to combine with the likes of lavender and daisies because they look just delightful together. What about growing some climbers? Climbers are a really great way of getting some colour up high on arbours, on balustrades and those sorts of things. And here our native plants can also be used to a great extent. So something like this Pandorea, this one here is called Lady Di. This is a white flowering form of Pandorea. They work exceptionally well. You can get lots of different colours of Pandoreas these days. You can intersperse them together so you get a multiple coloured effect. And that's a really nice way of also extending the flowering season of some of these unusual plants that we don't often see in everyone's gardens. If you've got a smaller space and you're wanting something just a little bit smaller, so he doesn't take over too much, you've got things such as the Hardenbergia. Now this is a small upright form of Hardenbergia. You can get the softer growing forms as well, but of course these are just delightful. Each spring they are covered in multiples of deep purple or pure white pea-like flowers in lovely soft racemes. In fact, they look a little bit like a miniature wisteria, I suppose, but that's another delightful native plant that we can have in our gardens, especially for a bit of delicate tracery. Now I mentioned the use of Grevilleas earlier, and of course this one here should not go unmentioned either. If you love ground covers and really good strong ones at that, this form of Grevillea lanigera is a really beautiful form to use. Bright hot pink flowers on this one. Now ground covers are really useful for filling up larger spaces, and of course they work as a natural mulch, so they'll help to keep the weeds down as well, plus at the same time be a food source for some of the smaller ground foraging birds as well, because they're rich in nectar and they're very much adored. This is a lovely plant that you could even use to trail over retaining walls if you wish to. Now, when it comes to cottage gardens, biodiversity is truly the key. We also want to show a change in foliage texture. We also want to show a change in foliage and flower colour. This form of Acmena is a lovely compact form. There is a plain green leaf form, but this one here is called Minnie Magic, and it is just a delightful plant to have because it doesn't really flower. It's really grown for its delightful foliage, but something like this in the form of a cottage garden, for instance, can show great textural change. The colour is really vibrant, so on overcast days it really shows its best values. And last but not least, of course, we're looking at a plant that everybody understands and knows and recognises, which is the old tea tree. Again, there used to be a lot of these planted around Brisbane, and of course I love tea trees because they're simple, they're delightful, they're easy to grow I think in most soils, but here's an extra thing. If you've got heavy clay soils, they are one of the best plants that you can use for heavier soils. They'll tolerate that very, very well. So some of the old tea trees or leptospermums are a great choice for putting into a cottage style garden where they'll gracefully grow to a shrub to about 2 metres tall. They'll bring a myriad of lovely foraging insects and of course our native bees. And it's a really nice plant to have. They come in colours of pink and white, and they are just delightful to have. And of course this is a plant that you can get at any nursery. In fact, most of these plants you can get at most of your nurseries, and have a look around and try and get something soft. So when you're next looking at getting a plant that you want to add into a cottage garden or maybe connect with the native environment, certainly don't look past some of these.
Now, just a thought. Here's something that was prepared earlier. What is it, you say? I don't know. Sprays made up in the garden should always be labelled. I have a couple of spray bottles and they're named weed killer, insecticide, fungicide. This way I know what I'm spraying with. You do hear tales where people have picked up what they thought was a fertiliser bottle, sprayed, and it was weed killer. And you can imagine how that ends. So it's always best to label so we don't have a mystery. Now, with the concentrates you buy and you make up at home, they have a shelf life of when you've made them of 24 hours. After that, they start to break down and they're not nearly as effective. So in theory, if you make your own sprays up at home, be it a commercial or a homemade remedy, try to use them within the first 24 hours, and that way you'll get the best results.